At Microsoft, we aim at building tools for developers. And in that case, we're aiming at building tools for device developers or IoT developers. And .NET is not left on the side. On the contrary, Bibsha is here on the IoT show today to tell us everything you need to know about a new version of the .NET SDKs for Azure IoT. And that's immediately, right now, on the IoT show. Hi everyone, welcome to the IoT show. I'm Olivier, your host, and today we have Bibsha to discuss the V2 of the .NET SDKs for Azure IoT. So how are you, Bibsha?
I'm doing good, thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic, I'm great. Welcome to the show. That's your first appearance. Yeah. I know it will not be the last because you are working on very interesting topics and a set of tools for developers out there, which is the SDKs for .NET developers. Yes. Yeah. So first of all, before we jump into that, who is Bibsha? Who are you? How long have you been at Microsoft? And what are you doing these days?
Yeah. So I am Bibsha Mishra. I work on the IoT SDKs team. And I've been in Microsoft for almost 5 years now.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you. So tell us about this V2, right? We are releasing a major new version for the .NET SDKs for developers to build apps on devices that connect to Azure IoT, as well as apps that will allow you to manage your Azure IoT Hub instance, right? So V2, big deal, major release. Why? Why are we doing that?
So we've had these SDKs around for a while now, and we've received a lot of feedback from customers about their experience using these SDKs, things that they would like changed, things that they would like added. We've incorporated a lot of those changes over the years, but some of those changes would require a major rehaul of the SDK because those would be breaking changes, and we do not take breaking changes lightly. So finally, we reached a point where we've gathered enough feedback directly from customers through addressing issues that come to us through LifeSite events. So now we have a list of things that we would like to change in our SDK so that the overall experience of using the SDK would be better for the customers. It would be faster for them to ramp up and then get the most out of the SDK.
I love that. So I think that's an important thing that I wanted to stress. We discussed that just before getting started here. You guys are doing lots of studies. It's not just about fixing issues that are reported by the users, the developers using our SDKs. You actually go all the way down to the usability studies on the SDKs, right?
Yeah. So we've done usability studies with a couple of users of the SDK. We've also worked through incidents that come to us from customers, and we've done those live coding sessions where we've seen how they use our SDK, what kind of issues kind of trip them over and guides them down the path that we don't want them to go. So we've taken all of that feedback from customers, and that's been the main inspiration for this.
Cool. So let's look at some examples of these main changes and what triggered them. So let's look at the device client to start with.
Yeah. So the device client, as you know, is going to be a long-living client. So generally in scenarios, you would initialize a client, have it communicate with the service, and that client would exist for a really long period of time. So it's really important that you're able to definitively know what state your client is in, how to recover from any exceptions that you might encounter. And so those were the two main things that we tried to revamp in this V2 of the SDK. So going into exception handling, previously with the SDK, there were a variety of exceptions that the client could encounter. And so when you're trying to code up your application to handle those, there would be a whole host of catch blocks that you would have to write. And I can show you an example that we have over here on the screen. So in here, we're just trying to send a telemetry message through a device client. And then as you can see here, you're catching different types of exceptions. You also have to incorporate some logic in here to see what kind of exception you're handling or encountering. And so
that's the V1 way of doing things?
Yes. And so we've tried to consolidate all of these exception types into a single type in the V2 SDK and incorporate all of the additional information about the exception within that. So we have a single exception, and it tells you if this is transient, if you should retry this operation, or if this is terminal and some user input is required in order to recover from this. So it really makes the code a lot more simpler. You just have to handle the scenarios that you are aware of. There's no unexpected exception that's popping up from somewhere underneath some third-party dependency library that you're using. So it makes this experience a lot more cleaner and intuitive.
Yeah, I like that. And it definitely goes along with the modernization of .NET development, right? Where we are following up, right? And it's not because it's IoT and it's good for a device or for applications to manage IoT services that has been niche for a long time. Now it's becoming more and more mainstream. And so we have more and more .NET developers coming and it's like, oh, this is not very elegant and not very practical. So we are basically going along with the way .NET is evolving as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There's just one type that you are made aware of. You're informed that these are the kind of things that you should expect your API to throw, and then it's easier for you to code your application around it and not run into unexpected scenarios.
There's another scenario I'm hearing developers talking about, which is the connection status changes events, things that allow to know when the connection is lost for a device, right? So are the things changing there?
Yes. So the connection status change, again, since this is a long-living device, you would need that information to know, is my client ready to be used right now? Should I be waiting? Should I close? What should I do? So we've had this connection status change callback, but then as you can see in the screen here, there was like a whole host of statuses and reasons that you need to be aware of in order to figure out exactly what you needed to do next. We have that information out there in our docs and in samples, but that's not really the way that we want to, that's not what we want to present to users as having to discover this in order to figure out how to write their application. So in the V2 SDK, we now have something called a recommended action that tells you what the SDK recommends that you should do based on your status of the client. So it tells you that I am ready to be used or I am done. You need to close me and then dispose and then be done with it. So that's something that we share as this recommended action. You are not required to follow it. If your application follows a different logic, say that you have a whole host of connection strings that you can use for your device client for connecting to service, and then one of them expired, and then you want to roll over to a different one, even though the recommended action would tell you that this is a bad credential and I cannot recover on my own, you can modify your application to use a different connection string that you have cached. So you can definitely override this recommended action, but then this is something that we present to users.
It talks to the intuitiveness of this new set of APIs here. One thing you alluded to in the beginning, saying that the main focus has been on a couple of things around the handling the exceptions as well as handling the life cycle of the client itself, because it's long living client. And so what happens in the area of the life cycle management of the client?
So these clients, generally you would initialize it, then run it throughout the lifetime of your application as you expect. And then once you're done with it, you'd close and then dispose. And that would ensure that all of your transport layer resources are gracefully shut down and then resources are disposed so that you don't have any memory leaks. With this V2 version of the client, we've made it easier for you to reopen clients after closing it, so you do not need to reinitialize the whole thing and start from scratch. It also makes it easier for you to reestablish connections because you're just closing the client and then reopening it. You're not disposing all of your resources and then recreating them.
And that's interesting because it's something that especially people who are not super familiar with IoT assume, which is the fact that devices are permanently sending all the telemetry data up to a connection. But then when you build an actual project, most of the time you realize that that data does not need to be sent every second. And so you need a client that is able to send something, shut off basically, say nothing, and then reconnect and send again. But that connection time is expensive in time. In battery, if you're on a battery-run device. And so I like this change, actually. I think lots of developers will love that.
For sure.
So this is some of the many things that are changing for the device clients. What about service clients? Anything there?
Service client is also getting the same exception handling revamp that we've done on the device client. So again, it's going to be a more simplified exception handling structure. You would not be expected to, you're not getting a whole host of unknown exceptions there. We're using the same pattern that we followed for the device client. We've also made some improvements with how you're initializing clients and discovering the APIs within those. In the V1 version of the SDK, there were a whole host of different clients that you had to initialize for the service client. There was one for managing identities, another for running jobs, whole other one if you wanted to invoke methods on your clients. So now everything is consolidated under a single client, and then you just have to discover the separate sub-clients underneath that. So we are hoping it's going to make it easier for people to find what they're looking for instead of having to go through a whole host of docs.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned that we're not for breaking changes, right?
Yeah.
But that's a major release. So that means that there are breaking changes, right?
Yeah. So as you said, this is a major release, so there are definitely a whole host of breaking changes. When you take a dependency on this SDK for the first time, and if you've used the V1 SDK before, you are definitely going to see a whole lot of errors. But we've put out a migration guide that guides you step by step on how to consume the V2 version of the SDK. It tells you this is the previous version of the API that you were using. This is what it's in the new SDK. If something's been removed, which I know is a touchy topic and people don't like that when stuff is removed. But we've taken customer feedback. We've taken a look at the numbers to see what makes sense. And then we've removed some things that did not make sense for this whole IoT space. One example of that being HTTP transport. MQTT is the industry standard for all IoT devices. So that's what we've tried to put front and center. That's going to be the default transport protocol when you initialize any of these clients. You also have the option of using AMQP transport. HTTP, on the other hand, since it follows request response pattern, there isn't like a topic that you can subscribe to. There aren't links that you're opening. So it didn't really have feature parity across the board. There were a lot of APIs that were simply not possible to be implemented over HTTP. There wasn't a whole lot of usage. So that's something that we've decided to remove in the V2 version of the SDK. That being said, I mean, we are open source. We are driven based on feedback, customer feedback. So if we do hear from customers that HTTP is something that they do need, there is a case for it, then that's definitely something that we'll revisit.
And the V1 is not going anywhere. It's not no longer in the mainstream of the maintained versions, but still, if you're using it today and it works for you, you don't have any reason to change your code on the devices that are in production, right? So that's something that
I mean, V1 is going to live for a while. We're still going to put in security fixes in there. So it's still going to be there. It's not that we're going to unlist stuff out of NuGet. But then we would definitely encourage people to move to V2 SDK and benefit from all of the new features in there.
Another last important point here is that these changes are about the client SDKs and not about the service. If you're using your own library for MQTT and connectivity and securing your connection to Azure IoT Hub, for example, there's nothing that changes from the Hub APIs or interface perspective, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Nothing's changing on the service side. This is just the client SDKs that are trying to make the user experience a little bit easier. So hopefully people who have used these V1 version of the SDK will find that they have a better experience with V2. People who've been wary of the V1 SDK for some reason, that they found it a little bit difficult to onboard, or else they did not find some feature that they were looking for, will hopefully also have a better experience with the V2 SDK. But yes, nothing's changing on the service side.
Awesome. Abhibsha, great overview of these changes. I'm sure people will be more than curious to go and check it out. So you can go and read the blog post that the team has put together where you have all the details about these changes. Feedback is more than welcome because you work based on feedback. We say that at the beginning, right? So
yes, absolutely. We are 100% feedback driven.
What's the best way? Is it GitHub where developers should go and file issues and provide feedback?
Absolutely. We do have an open discussion on our GitHub page about all of these new changes that we brought onto V2. So definitely, if you have any feedback, once you try it out, let us know, and then we'll get working.
Awesome. Well, you know what you have to do. Thanks for watching this episode of Abhibsha. Thanks for coming to the show again.
Thank you.
And looking forward to see you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.